Okay, jumping into the waiting room as promised is former Super Bowl champion, a three-time Super Bowl champion, former Washington Redskin at the time, former Denver Bronco, somebody you grew up watching in the Colorado area, Sarah, and I grew up watching him on NFL Live. He is now a national broadcaster for Fox. He's also a radio personality with 104.3 The Team. My good buddy Zach By, I know he's friendly with, and now I guess the last time I talked to Mark was with Ravens Radio, and we now bring him inside the vault here for a good conversation and expand a little bit on your July 4th conversation that you had with my co-host here, Sarah. But first and foremost, Mark, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Always good to be on with you guys. Always good to be able to have actual discussions, right? As opposed to some of the things that happen on social media that just become shouting matches. So always good to be with sane people.
Right back at you. And I do want to thank you because I was cheering on the Broncos for so many years. How many times Super Bowl loss, and then finally 98 they break through. I grew up in Colorado Springs. I was a big fan and followed you there. So what has the last week been like for you? You've been going back, not just back and forth with me, but Ravens fans. So what has the last week been for you? And what's kind of your main message to Ravens fans?
Well, I think to Raven, there's a difference between Ravens fans and just Lamar fans. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a big difference there. There's a distinction there. But ultimately, when it comes to the Ravens in general, I think they're an unbelievably well-run organization. As a matter of fact, I texted with Harbaugh yesterday just to say, hey, listen, dude, you may catch some strays on my behalf, but I want to let you know when you walk into camp, you may get a few. But playoffs are difficult. The best teams obviously are in those playoffs, and all three phases of your football team and your coaching staff have to be right. And one of the things that happened to me in Denver, and you were there, you were following us in Colorado Springs, is in 1996, we went into a situation where we were the best offense in football. We were the best running team in football. We went into a divisional playoff game against the Jacksonville Jaguars and ended up getting our ass kicked. And one of the things that happened to us in that particular game is, and I blame this, and Mike Shanahan and I we're very tight. We're friends. He's become a real mentor of mine. But I don't hesitate in saying that was your fault. And one of the things that happened is we had this identity of being able to run the football and run the football in any situation. And we got into a situation where we had this package that basically, if Jacksonville got into certain fronts, and this is a big term in the NFL, and it's something I hate, and I hear it every weekend when I'm calling games. Well, we want to be in premium plays. You have to understand that not every situation is a premium situation, and there is value in just kicking somebody's ass, even if it's a 2-yard gain. And so we got into a situation against Jacksonville where they could check us out of the run based upon the front that they were playing. And this happens a lot in the NFL. If we get an unfavorable matchup from a number count standpoint, well, we're going to get one-on-ones on the outside, so we're going to check everything to the pass. And ultimately, teams can try to take you out of their running game and make you beat them from the pocket doing that. And I'm a believer, and I have to have a game plan put together where I can exploit even 8 and 9 man boxes, and they cannot take me out of what we do best. Well, in that particular game, I think Terrell Davis it was either 12 or 14 carries for 90 some odd yards. He averaged over 6 yards a carry. And here's a guy that ran it 25 to 30 times a game, and he got it 12 times or 14 times, something like. And to me, our coaching staff lost that game. But ultimately, it was the catalytic event in our life as a football team that led us to back-to-back world championships. The 6 carries to me is inexcusable. But I understand that when you get those matchups, then your quarterback is going to have to play better than he's played in the playoffs. And what I said wasn't egregious, or it comes off. People accuse me of being racially motivated or being a bigot, which is just absolute silliness. That's stupidity. Is Lamar Jackson, if we were sitting here, and I've sat with him in many meetings, if we were sitting here together, he'd tell me, I have to play better come playoff time. I have to be better in those critical games at a 57% completion rate and, 6 touchdowns versus 6 interceptions. Like, he'd be the first to jump on that hand grenade and say, man, I got to be better. He is a thoughtful, smart, unbelievably gifted player. But as a 2-time MVP, when you get into the playoffs, you got to be better. And hey, man, there will be nobody that will be more critical of Lamar's game than Lamar will be of his game. So I don't have any equivocation or hesitation of saying he's got pressure on him come playoff time because he's that damn good.
Mark, can we revisit the comments that you expanded on after the pressure video and
Sure.
then have you react to those just so you can kind of expand a little bit and maybe calm some of the folks out there. Here's the second clip, you expanding on the first one, which was talking about how much pressure he's under, which is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Do not want to hear from all of you out there that are telling me that Lamar Jackson, well, they don't get him weapons. How many first-round wide receivers do you need to draft? Well, they're not drafting the right one. Well, you're not developing them. Well, how do you develop them? Well, your quarterback has a long way to go in developing wide receivers. So I don't want to hear that from you anymore. And you Baltimore fans, I'm tired of it. They drafted first-round talent. They've drafted tight ends in the first round. They've drafted 3 different wide receivers since 2018 in the first round. I mean, Aaron Rodgers went, 16, 17 years with the Green Bay Packers. They never drafted a guy in the first round, whether it was a tight end or a wide receiver for him. So don't tell me about it. I mean, it's one of those things. Don't tell me about the pain. Show me the baby. Produce in the playoffs.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's the one. I think, and we can get back to pressure a little bit. I think Lamar's definitely under pressure. Maybe under the most pressure of any quarterback, but I would argue that he's not even the most pressure in Baltimore. We can revisit that. But he's under pressure. I think that clip is what I wanted to push back against, and I think many Ravens fans, because I guess I want to dive deep into. I mean, I worked at the Ravens for 13 years. Obviously, I do not have the credentials you do, but obviously both Bobby and I have been covering football forever. I definitely think that quarterbacks can elevate wide receiver play. They can elevate the guys around them 1,000%. But it's not like you go around hearing like, oh, quarterbacks need to develop their wide receivers. So are you distinguishing? Are you trying to say that quarterbacks should elevate them, or are you saying it's literally Lamar's job to develop his wide receivers?
Well, I think both things are true. 2 things can be true at once. You've got to elevate your wide receivers, but you've got to help in the development, the global perspective. You have to help your receivers see the game through your eyes as a quarterback. And so, I don't think that's an outrageous comment. And I don't think it's I got a lot of pushback on. Now Lamar has to coach his wide receivers. No, but his wide receivers better understand coming out of this break what I'm looking at and what I need you to do for me. So I'll go back. I'll tell you guys 2 stories. And both of these go back to me as an analyst. So one was in 2012, I was on the football field with Peyton Manning, watching him orchestrate the offense in Denver. And he was running a blitz pickup drill. There was not one coach involved in this blitz pickup drill. It was offense versus scout team defense. And John Fox runs up to me and goes, we're the least blitz team in the National Football League. Peyton demands that we do this drill. So we do it, and we let him have total and complete control. Now, in the process of that drill, Peyton Manning is out there yelling at receivers and basically lining up as a receiver, showing him exactly the route he wants run on this blitz, the depth, the head fake, where he wants that route broken off. He's notorious for leaving notes in guys' locker when he was playing his receivers' lockers. At this particular route, I want this cut off at 11, not 12 yards. If you don't cut it off at 11, you'll never see another football. As long as notorious for doing this. Brandon Stokely, former Raven, former Colt and Bronco, has told me Peyton has frozen me out of practice because I dropped the ball. I never got another ball the rest of practice. Like it's that type of quote unquote what I would call development. You know, I mean, we can argue on semantics, but I went to Tampa to do a game, Brady's first year there. And one of the most interesting things that has been said to me in kind of my broadcasting career, through several different guys, but it was Brady who said it. First off, Mike Evans I was talking to Mike Evans after practice, and he goes, man, I just asked him the Brady effect. He goes, you know what? I thought I was prepped. I thought I was working hard. I thought, like, you know, I mean, this is a guy who had been to multiple Pro Bowls, right? Like multiple All-Pro receiver. Going, I thought I was doing like studying. I thought I was preparing. Then Brady comes in here and it completely changes the level of preparation, of study, of everything that we do as a football team. You know, I've said this. Was Wes Welker, when he got cut from Miami, was he not developed when he went to New England, became a multiple Pro Bowler by Tom Brady? Julian Edelman, who was a former quarterback at Kent State, do you think there was some development that went on in his career to get him to where he is, or where he ended up? And so this is what Brady told me about Tampa, and I thought it was really, really interesting. He goes, you know, we're behind because they started, you remember, when they won that Super Bowl his first year, they started the season at like 8-6. And Brady said, you know, we're really behind where I'd like to be right now in the quarterback wide receiver kind of connection. Because in New England, it was cool enough to where when we operated as an offense in an offensive period, and then the next period was a defensive period, I would go back with all my receivers and say, hey, on this particular play, if we get that in the game, I want it run this way, or I want it run that way. And we would work on that during the defensive drills. He goes, in Tampa Bay, it's so freaking hot, we can't do it. My receivers are over there gassed, they're sucking wind, and they got to get water or they'll cramp up. So he goes, we're behind in our development between quarterback and wide receiver, in them seeing the game through my eyes. We're behind in that. So when I talk about the development of receivers, I'm talking about that connection. I'm talking about that extra. I'm talking about the things that you know that we talk about, I guess, as players. And those are the things that I was discussing in not only enhancing a wide receiver, but the great quarterbacks have a way of developing and making sure that those guys do exactly what they're looking at and seeing the game through their eyes. So that's my, I don't know if that's a semantic thing, but I believe that's part of your responsibility, and why they pay you guys 55, 60 million bucks a year is that's part of your job.
Yeah, so I appreciate that distinction. I think it does help when you give like the background of the stories of like Manning, you know, freezing people out and holding wide receivers accountable. And I think we in Baltimore have definitely seen that more with Lamar, especially with the arrival of Monken, because he's been for sure more empowered. Like Lamar has definitely been more vocal, whereas like I can just tell you here covering, like it was Roman's system and it was the system above the players, and Monken's the opposite. It's, I want to build a system around the players.
Right.
And so and then there's the background, because you were so passionate there, there's the background in Baltimore where people love Ozzie and so far are happy with Eric, but people were calling Ozzie, if he wasn't a Hall of Fame tight end, he would be a Hall of Fame general manager. You can't go in twice.
Sure.
But even Ozzie and Eric have admitted that wide receiver is their Achilles heel. You have 34 drafted, more have been drafted in the first round, yes. But when you have a history of missing in the draft 34 times total, but, you know, 7 or 8 in the first round, and that's happening since Lamar was in diapers, then it's all of a sudden like, wait a minute, this is where people start to feel, well, Lamar's being criticized unfairly. Because you at least need to like mention how bad the Ravens have been at drafting wide receivers.
Right. So I would always push back, and I don't. You would know better than I, but I would always push back. like a guy like Hollywood Brown having 91 catches for over 1,000 yards in 2021. That's pretty freaking good production.
Yeah.
And then he wants to be gone. I don't know the inside why he would want to be gone. I will tell you this. I know enough about wide receivers in this league, and you've got to understand, I believe in building a team from the inside out. So I believe in the way the Ravens have built their football team, because they absolutely they clobber snock people. I mean, they just beat the shit out of people. Excuse my French.
True.
And I appreciate the shit out of the way they're built, and I appreciate the way Ozzie and DaCosta and John Harbaugh have helped build that team and the philosophies that they believe in. So I'm big into that. You and I went back and forth, and sometimes you don't get to say all the things you want to say on Twitter. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, or X, or whatever it is now. But I know enough about this league, and I've talked to enough people within this league that play in this league and that coach in this league, that when you're talking about free agent wide receivers that are trying to get paid, but are trying to be the focal point of an offense, you don't want to go to Baltimore, because Baltimore, like in today's game, the way the game is played now, you're going to throw the ball 60, 65%, 70% of the time in today's game. Well, Baltimore is going to be the number one run football team, or right there in the top 2 or 3 in football. So you're going to throw it, 50% maybe? So there's 15 less percentage points opportunity for you as a receiver, and you want to be the guy. Listen, I've always believed this. The further you get away from the ball, the less you live in reality. The further you get away from the ball, the more dependent you become. And so, as a receiver, if I'm a big time wide receiver, it's not a scarlet letter on Lamar. It's a scarlet letter on the offense. I'm not going to go to an offense that's going to run it 55% of the time, because that's going to limit my opportunity. Like, the receivers want to be the focal point.
Yep.
And so when you talk about, well, they haven't really signed a free agent, that's one of the things I think, I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's what you said to me, is like, well, I'll tell you, a lot of guys don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, the butthurt Lamar fans, because I don't consider a lot of Lamar fans Baltimore fans. They're just flat out Lamar fans. It's like what we went through here in Denver with Tebow. That was a cult, man. Like, it was a flat out cult. And so, like, there's a lot of cultish, Lamar fans out there. It's not a scarlet letter on Lamar. It's just the way that offense has been, and the way that franchise has run their team. And so, a lot of the if you're a big time, if you're Devontae Adams,
it's funny you brought him up, because we had the quote. He actually was asked, would you prefer to go back to the Raiders and have a 2,000-yard season, or would you rather go play with Lamar and have a chance to play for a Super Bowl? And he straight up said, he's like, listen, 2,000 would be nice. It would be nice.
Right.
But I've done that. He said, I'd rather play with Lamar.
Sure.
Devontae Adams. So I'm just saying, it's not impossible. Like, I totally agree with you. Like, what wide receiver wants to play in a run first offense?
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
But if they were paid, I've seen a lot of guys go to bad organizations because they're getting paid right.
Yeah.
And Mark,
so listen, I agree wholeheartedly. But Devontae Adams now, knowing what he knows now about going and playing for the Raiders versus what he wanted then, like, guys want to, on that second continent, everybody wants to get paid. Like, it's not until you really get paid, you make the big money, and then you're late in your career where you're like, wow, I really, like, I'm missing something, and I want to win a championship. And I think, obviously, I think Baltimore is one of the best constructed football teams. And I think they are, well, you work for them for 13 years. Like, I travel around every week, and I'm in a different facility every week. The Baltimore Ravens are a top-notch, first-class organization in every way, shape, and form. And they are like a pleasure to work with, and their guys are great and everything else. And I think that, I think that, yes, if you really want to win, if you're really truly about a championship, then that's a place you would go sacrifice, 500 yards and whatever receptions, 20 receptions to win, to put a ring on your finger. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Mark, speaking to the Marquise Brown conversation, it's well known in Baltimore that the reason he left was due to Greg's system.
His quote when he was on I Am Athletes Tonight, he said, I talked to Lamar about it after my second year. Then after my third year, leading up to the end of the season, he wasn't playing. He said, I let him know again, like, bro, I can't do it. It's not really on Lamar. I love Lamar. It was just the system wasn't for me. It was very well known. He did not see eye to eye with Greg Roman.
So I think your tweet, some led your tweet to feel as if their takeaway was that you were kind of inferring that Lamar ran him out of town when it's well documented.
Yeah, no. It had nothing to do with Lamar. It had to do with the system, and it had to do with, hey man, if you're a receiver running in and you're playing in that system, even though you have 91 catches, man, you're required to block people. You're required to do some things that dig out some safeties. You're required to do some things that a lot of guys that play wide receiver, especially slight ones, don't want to do. And so for me, that was a big part of our offense in Denver. Receivers have to block. It's what they do in San Francisco, and ultimately it's what they do in Baltimore as well. So you can be upset with the system and all those things. I mean, I totally understand that, but it wasn't necessarily about Lamar. It's about the system, but it is partially about Lamar because the system was put in place at that time to do and take advantage of what Lamar does best. And what Lamar does best is be one of the most gifted athletes on the planet. So you're taking advantage. So, it may not be directly because of Lamar, but you're running that offensive system because of Lamar. And so there is a correlation there. If you're just using common sense, there's a correlation there that you can't avoid. Regardless of how you feel or what your emotional state is. Right.
I totally agree. I mean, listen, but there's a caveat to it. Like if you're a wide receiver and let's go back to Hollywood Brown. Like, even though he had a ton of targets, he's looking at the Ravens and it's just like, you run way more than the Cardinals do. And I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to get that amount of targets before I go in for my second contract. So, 100% agree with that. And I think it would be dumb or disingenuous to pretend that part of the reason why the Ravens are run first is because you have one of the greatest dual threat quarterbacks ever. And so you're going to run more because of that. Sure. That being said, I think the Ravens admitted something to the world when they moved on from Greg Roman to Todd Monken. And that admission is that while we were phenomenal in 2019, the system did not evolve enough. There was no imagination in the passing game, even if you're still going to be run first. There was no sophistication, right? We had Steve Young on our show in December. He was adamant about this, that you're not even giving Lamar a chance to show his arm and to becoming a sophisticated passer. Enters Todd Monken, and I've never seen more of a push to empower a quarterback, at least in Baltimore, of being at the line of scrimmage, and especially this year, wanting him to make calls at the line of scrimmage, to be able to make those choices, to be able to actually have, I mean, Steve Smith said it was like a JV passing scheme under Greg Roman. And so, yes, you're running guys out of town, and I get how you're like correlating it with Lamar, but I think the Ravens admitted by firing Greg Roman that they didn't give him enough chance to become a better passer. We saw what that result was in year one, and we're hoping for even more in year two. I mean, I know that you've admitted he was a better passer in year one, and that was the first year they empowered him to do all that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the fans are pushing back, that you're putting it, at least in some of those clips that are played, it feels like you're blaming Lamar for not developing. You're blaming him for the entire history of the wide receiver. You're blaming him for the wide receivers not coming here, even though the Ravens never, ever pay wide receivers. They've always been in the bottom 20. The only time they were top 10 was the year they won the 2012 Super Bowl year. And so they were exactly top 10. And so you don't even have to pay like the number one guy. But can you go get a veteran who can complement Zay, who had the fumble, and we all believe he's going to be great? We don't hold that against him. It was a rookie mistake. But like Anquan Bolden wouldn't have done that. A veteran doesn't do that. And so it's like, it just felt like you were putting all of that on Lamar when there's so much the Ravens also aren't doing at the same time. And so, and I think that they admitted that they weren't when they moved on for Greg Roman and went to Todd Monken.
Yeah, no, I think all those things that you say are fair, and obviously you guys know how the game is played. Like I don't create those clips. Like the producers create the clips and we put them out there on to get you to listen and have a conversation about the entirety of the podcast. But I understand how some of those are taken. Now some of that also is taken out of context, not out of context, but from a fan's perspective, they're so passionate about it that they become blind because of their passion to a degree, as opposed to looking at it from a more rational standpoint. So there's part of that goes on as well, with Lamar fans. And I understand that. The Todd Monken, like the Greg Roman thing, the Todd Monken thing, listen, that's the style of offense that they put in because that's where they assume Lamar was at the time.
Right.
And they did a phenomenal job of installing that offense and moving forward. Now, listen, here's the deal. Once a guy graduates or has the ability to have more on his plate, well, then the offense certainly year after year needs to evolve. I understand that. I get that. And sometimes you feel stagnated. You decide to go in a different direction with a Todd Monken. That's great. I'm not here to bash Lamar or to bash Greg Roman's system. They had success. They had great success under that system. And sometimes you outgrow it, or sometimes you need a change. Or sometimes you just need to freshen up. Like I get all those things. And there is that aspect of saying, how are we going to grow a guy out of what he does best as he's continuing to progress in his NFL career and get him more into kind of more of a drop back offense? Because let's face it, the old saying, and this goes back to Steve Young stuff, is I've seen a lot of good young running quarterbacks. I've never seen a good old running quarterback. Like you're going to take a beating at some point. And so you've got to progress into an offense that's going to protect you a little bit more from the pocket. Although I've had these conversations with John about his scrambling around and his being able to protect himself, where you take more big hits from the pocket than you take if you're Lamar and you're that athletic, scrambling around and running the ball and doing all those things. But eventually somebody's going to square you up, and you don't want that for your quarterback. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance to the conversation that we're having, and the whole process of the conversation. The thing that pissed me off more than anything else is saying that he's got probably the most. We were having an NFC North or AFC and NFC North conversation, but ultimately saying I think he's got more playoff pressure being a two-time MVP than anybody else, and that all of a sudden getting me tagged with racist comments like, well, you didn't comment about any white guys, like
That's
can we not be we not be beyond that point? Like Lamar is a freaking phenomenal player and a phenomenal kid. And that just becomes to me stupid. Then we're not really having a true conversation like we're having right now.
That's ludicrous, and hopefully that's just the vocal minority that you were seeing on Twitter.
Sure,
that couldn't be farther from the
truth. Well, that's the like when I say that's the cult. Like there is man, I dealt with it here in Denver for years, where I say Tebow's the greatest guy in the world, and you do not want him playing quarterback for your team. Sorry. He's not good. Like that's just the way it is. And I'll tell you what, you get the same, these same type of fanatics that are out there in regards to Lamar that won't look at it like it's like the line from North Dallas 40. just when you call it a business, I call it a game, or when I call it a game, you call it a business. When I call it a business, you call it a game. It's like when I say it's about the quarterback, you say it's about the team. When I say it's about the team, you say it's about the quarterback. Like you can't win that conversation
Sure.
with people who aren't willing to listen and at least educate themselves on how the game operates. But I will tell you this about the receiver position, and you'll never talk me off it. There's two guys in the history of this game going 58 years to the Super Bowl, just the Super Bowl history of this game, that have won, have had more yards than any other receiver in the game that year and won Super Bowls. And that's Jerry Rice and that is Cooper Kupp. And that is it. So everybody in the NFL plays a dependent position, but there's no more dependent position in the NFL than receiver. Everybody, all 10 guys on a football field offensively have to do their job exceptionally well for you to sniff a football. So the fact that we have, to me, overvalued the receiver position in this game, and that's not a Baltimore thing. That's not that's just me personally. I think we have put way too much emphasis on the importance or the value of wide receivers in this game. And that's probably another thing that separates me from Baltimore Raven fan that pisses them off, because I just don't put as much value as most people do in that position.
Mark, can we quickly revisit the comment made about strategizing for Lamar? You mentioned conversations that you've had, what seemingly happen week after week with defensive coordinators.
Sure.
And they have told you in the recent past that the strategy that they employ is contain him in the pocket. Was that the case last year with the games that you had?
Well, I didn't have any Baltimore games last year, but go back to the AFC Championship game, and what they did in Kansas City, or what Kansas City did to Lamar, was what we would call it a cage rush. The biggest issue you have with Lamar is when you get a free runner at him and he makes that guy miss with either a blitz or a design kind of zone blitz or regular blitz or 5-man pressure, whatever you want to call it. When you get a free runner at him and he makes that guy miss, you're in deep trouble. And that is whether he decides to run it or whether he holds on to the ball and throws it down the football field. Because as soon as he starts attacking the line of scrimmage, like as a defensive player, you're about ready to shit your pants, because you can't tackle him. Like the guy is a freak show. And so what Kansas City did, and I could probably point to 5 examples where they get a free runner, like a DB running free off the edge, and that guy stops 3 yards short of hitting Lamar and just settles. And basically what they're telling you, and what defensive coordinators have told me, everybody that I talk to, is like, hey man, the one thing that scares us more than anything else is Lamar's ability to extend the play, run, to make plays in the running game, and to make plays off schedule with his legs. So our biggest priority is if he's going to beat us, he's going to beat us from the pocket. And that's our best chance to win, because that's not where he's the most skilled. Is he skilled there? Absolutely. He's skilled there, especially when you consider if you run the ball like the Baltimore Ravens, you're going to get a safety that enters into the box. So for you as a offensive player, you're going to get 2 forms of coverage. You're going to get a cover 3, which if you're playing cover 3, you got a single high safety in the middle of the football field. Anytime you get a free release, you got one-on-one. Anytime you get a release on the outside, you run a vertical route. That's one-on-one. That's man-to-man. And then you're going to get cover 1, which is straight up man-to-man with a safety in the middle of the field, a free player in the middle of the field, and a free hole player. But the bottom line is you're going to get one form of coverage. And because they run the ball the way they run the ball, like that's where Lamar is eating people alive out of the pocket, because you're getting man-to-man stuff. You're getting man-to-man looks all the time. And so he's exploited that stuff. He's done a really good job with that stuff. But yeah, that's where you go back Kansas City, and like I said, I could show you 4 or 5 clips probably where free runners stopped and didn't pursue him. They just stopped and kind of tried to corral him, or what they call cage rush him, and just keep him in that hole, in that pocket. So there's no question that that's the strategy. And that's what you're going to get until you end up going to the playoff games and eviscerating someone in the passing game, which he, just hasn't done yet.
Hey, Mark, I know you got to go. I know I do. I have about 5 minutes, but just revisiting the pressure stuff where you originally were getting, personal attacks and stuff like that. So the context that I remember is that they asked which quarterback is under the most pressure, and you named Lamar. And I don't think that's crazy. I mean, I think Joe Burrow could be in the conversation. Dak could be in it. Josh Allen. Like, there's guys that can, like, everybody's under pressure because Mahomes keeps doing his thing, right?
Right.
So, I think it's fair if you pick Lamar out of those 4 or 5 guys. But here's a question I have for you to kind of make you look at it from a Baltimore view. Who do you think is more under pressure to win a Super Bowl in 2024? Lamar Jackson or John Harbaugh?
Well,
whose job security is more secure? Like, whose job is more secure?
Right. Well, I would look at that question and say John Harbaugh won one in 2012. I think it was a season with Joe Flacco. And again, one of the reasons that I'd picked Lamar, and this is just kind of off the cuff, like I don't know that anybody's, we talked about Dak too. And one of the things that I've said to a lot of fans, a lot of Baltimore Ravens fans, is the reason Lamar has more pressure is because he's a 2-time freaking MVP. Joe Burrow isn't. Justin Herbert isn't. Justin Herbert's a 500 quarterback to this point. And yeah, he's been exceptional throwing the football, but they haven't won. So there's a lot of pressure there. Trevor Lawrence, again, I don't have the same level of belief in those guys that I have in Lamar based upon the 2 MVPs. And so, they're not firing Lamar. Right. So, like, from a are you going to get fired standpoint? Well, John is under more pressure.
Yeah.
But if John Harbaugh let me just tell you guys this: if John Harbaugh gets fired in Baltimore, he will have a job in about 4 seconds.
1,000%
to coach somebody else.
Yeah.
So, again, that goes back to Lamar. You can't be a 2-time MVP and do the things you've done. People point to Josh Allen. Josh Allen is 500 in the playoffs. I get it. Lamar is 2-4. Josh Allen has 21 TDs versus 4 interceptions in the playoffs. Now, people are like, well, you're never critical of him. Man, I have said things about Josh Allen that, like, hey, man, hero ball, has too much confidence in his arm, makes crappy decisions in the red zone. Like, I've said it all. But, nobody in Baltimore hears that because they're hypersensitive to anything you say about Lamar.
Yeah.
And so it is what it is. I understand it comes with the territory. It's called the Stinking Truth Podcast for a reason, is because I just try to give it to you, straight, no chaser. And what I believe, based upon my career and based upon being on championship teams and playing for championship organizations. And, people say, well, Lamar gets more criticism than I go back. Like, that's revisionist history. Like, Peyton Manning was criticized. He was crucified for not being able to perform in the playoffs. Like, he was crushed for not performing in the play. And still to this day, he's, only a few games over 500, people would look at it. I would say Aaron Rodgers. I call that franchise with the Green Bay Packers the dynasty that never was. You're a 4-time MVP. You have 1 Super Bowl. So if you go to Thanksgiving dinner and there's the big table and then the kids table, you don't get to sit at the big table. You get to sit at the kids table because you got 1 Super Bowl. So you don't get to sit with Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw and Tom Brady and the guys with multiple Super Bowl rings. And until we come up with a better platform to judge careers, like, championships are going to be part of it. And it's probably, that part of it is probably unfair, but it is what it is. And I'll leave you with this thought. Playing with John Elway, who was also criticized for just getting his ass kicked in Super Bowls up until we won the back-to-back Super Bowls. And you look at he was 19-32 or something. I mean, he had he was not Super Bowl 32 that we won. Like, he was not statistically did not perform well in that game. But that game again was about us running the football and us controlling the tempo of that game. But John Elway told me this when we were playing together, and this was late in his career, but he was just like, hey man, you guys, your responsibility is first and second down. That's your responsibility. My responsibility is to convert on third down and be great in the red zone. That sums it up. And, your responsibility, as a quarterback, I believe is to be great in those critical situations, in those critical moments when we need you to be great.
I don't disagree with any of that. Just as you go back on your national program and you're, bringing the truth as you see it and all that from again, a Baltimore perspective. And Bobby and I went to the Super Bowl. We interviewed maybe 20 people. Everybody says the same thing you do. Harbaugh's the best. He'd get a job if he were fired. I mean, if Lamar were let go, he'd have a job like that too. But just so you know the history, so you can kind of put this into your calculus. After the 2017 season, before they drafted Lamar, John Harbaugh and the Ravens missed the playoffs three years in a row. John Harbaugh had one. This is post Super Bowl. He had a great Super Bowl run with Joe and Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and all that.
Right.
But after that, John falls off, and he has one playoff win without Lamar. He misses the playoffs 3 years in a row. And at 2017, Steve Bisciotti was asked if he wrestled with the idea of firing John Harbaugh and Ozzie Newsome. He straight up said no to Ozzie. And he said, John, it was a thought. And he kind of went through the whole season and how John fought through things. And he says, but it was certainly a consideration. But one I'm not inclined to do this year. So the media followed up and said, well, what if he doesn't make the playoffs next year? And he said, well, I'm not going to come and see me next year. I'm not going to give a playoff or bust edict to my head coach. That's not how you do business. And he says this, but he's under as much pressure probably than he's ever been in his life.
Sure.
The next year they go in under Joe Flacco. They have a losing record going into the bye, 4-5. They bring in Lamar. Lamar rips off 6 wins in 7 games. And then suddenly they start going to the playoffs every year that Lamar's healthy. So in one of your tweets, I feel like you kind of implied that the Ravens saved Lamar from being a wide receiver because other people would have done that. But if the Ravens were that good, they could just take anybody and make him a 2-time MVP. I mean, obviously, and I know you recognize this, like Lamar's great. And so, but the idea is that John has a terrible playoff record since that Super Bowl. And listen, on this show, I get accused of being a Harbaugh, like biased towards him. I think he's a great coach, and I take so much heat for sticking up for him. But in this case, I have to call a spade a spade. His playoff record is 3-6 since the Super Bowl, and he only had 1 without Lamar. And so, if anybody saved anybody, I mean, I really do think that the evidence is there that it's more Lamar saved his job, given where Steve Bisciotti was at the end of 2017. And then they've been going to the playoffs religiously with Lamar here. So if one saved the other, I don't know that either one really saved each other. I think they're both great. But I think if you were to argue that one saved the other, I'd say Lamar has more helped John in his career rather than them saving Lamar from maybe being a career wide receiver.
Sure. I mean, sure. What's Belichick's record without Tom Brady?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that the quarterback is always going to be, in my estimation, the quarterback will always be more important than the head coach when it comes to your ability to win games and your ability to dominate for a long period of time. But let me just give you food for thought. If John Harbaugh because there's an injury to Joe Flacco, because I did the first game in 2018 when Joe Flacco came back from injury and was a healthy scratch because Lamar was playing so well. I did that game in a sheeting rainstorm. God, I can't even remember who they were playing. I imagine it was an NFC team, but I don't remember who they were playing. But they completely changed that offense. Like Marty Morningwig was the offense coordinator at the time. They completely changed that offense to take advantage of what Lamar, the gifts that he had athletically.
That's true, but they built it more in 2019. In 2018, They were still building for Joe.
Right.
They still had weapons. Like it was built for Joe. They were on record.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. But if John Harbaugh says, let's just keep the offense the same and make Lamar play in it, you're going back to Flacco. the fact that your coach recognized that, hey man, we're going to change this and we'll change what we're doing, and that's an organizational standpoint, but that still goes through the head coach, gets the final say in doing that. And then they, like you said, they moved on in 2019. I think they went to Roman, and all that kind of stuff. So there is that aspect of, obviously the quarterback to me is more important. Again, Bill Belichick's record's under 500 without Tom Brady.
Yeah.
So, when people say what's more important, the coach or the quarterback, obviously, but there are some things they did to build that football team, to take advantage. I'll never forget the conversation, because Joe Flacco at that time was getting a little grief because he wasn't necessarily a great mentor. You remember this in 2018? Like,
oh yeah,
he was getting a lot of grief for not being a great mentor. So I asked him about it, and it was so funny because we were standing in this rainstorm on the field, and he's like, dude, what am I going to tell Lamar? Like, he goes, I don't run zone read plays. I don't here's where you should pull the ball and scramble out. He's like, what am I going to tell the kid? Like, this offense is completely different than what the offense that I run. He goes, I don't have a vague clue on like what we're doing. I can't operate this offense. And so that was the first game. I called that game where he was a healthy scratch. He came back from injury and they scratched him because they completely changed the offense. So anyhow, I got to roll. I got to go catch a flight.
And Mark, you know what's crazy about that is that Joe didn't shy away from sharing those types of thoughts publicly either. He's having that conversation with you on the field. That's kind of what he said publicly too.
Right.
So
good.
Anyway, we said 20 to 30 minutes. You gave us close to an hour. I know a lot of people in the live chat are, one, there's a contingent of people still coming after you. But two, I think the majority of people appreciate that you were willing to do this, as are we. So we appreciate you, Mark.
My pleasure. Take care.
Safe travels.
All right,
Talk to you soon.